This video was made possible by the wonderful people over on the subreddit Discord for Final Fantasy XIV. A link will be provided in the description of this video for you to go and give them some love. Special thanks to Eluna Minori and the rest of the translation team for making this transcript possible and easily digestible for people like myself to make content on. Hello and welcome back to another video for Final Fantasy XIV, this time looking at the second part of Live Letter 68, which was 3 days ago from the time of recording. Basically, the second half was just Q&A. I did say I would probably put a video up for this, and yeah, there were some little tidbits of information that are worthwhile. Only, the second half is absolutely enormous to watch, so I thought we'd do this, without that much stumbling around and just get to the points. So let's just get straight to that. This was obviously translated by the Square Enix staff, and obviously was live translated, so you can go watch that in its entirety on Square Enix's Final Fantasy XIV YouTube channel, or, we can just go through this here. So anyway, this is what we're going to do. So for the first question, I was wondering what Azem was up to during the final days. Is Azem aware of what's going on from Vanna? And how did Azem parted ways with Emmett Selk and Hyflodeus? Will we learn more about Azem in the future? The answer to this is, so what did Azem do during the final days after taking the seat from Vanna is a secret. We do sort of have an idea what they were up to, but we're not sure if we will have the chance to talk about it in the future. However, I do think that you are all the Warriors of Light. I'm sure what you imagined about Azem would have been done during the final days can pretty much be close to the truth. For instance, well, I've seen players mention housing or mahjong or doing errands and all that. Yeah, if you think so, then yeah, that's what Azem did during that time, end quote. So basically, it's up to your interpretation, basically because you are kind of like that inheritance of that character, basically. Next question. Why did Xenos dream about the Amarot final days? Also, how did he come to be the Reaper and learn to manipulate his avatar in time before 6.0? The answer is, first thing you need to remember is that Xenos' father is Varys, right? While Varys' grandfather is Solus, which is Xenos' grand-great-father in this case, which by extension is Emmett Selk. And since Xenos is related to Emmett Selk, being a direct descendant of Emmett here, if you think about how sometimes when things are passed down through DNA and they don't disappear in every generation, but eventually in some way remember, if you think about it like that, maybe you can sort of understand what happened here. Obviously, this is a side story here, but if you read our Tales from the Shadows, you may find some hints in there, so perhaps right now it's a good time to review them. As for how Xenos became a Reaper and obtained his avatar, I didn't imagine people would ask this question, and this is a good one, but I am bound to stay silent on this. It's not that we didn't get to think about it, but we cannot discuss this, so sorry. Interesting. Very interesting. I wonder what they're hiding behind that. Very, very curious. Next question. I am interested to know how unsundered Asians such as La Habrea, Elidibus, and Emmett Selk avoided being kicked into 14 pieces by Hydaelyn. Oh, well, as you think back to the text towards the end, Emmett said, did imply that Vanna let him live unsundered. In fact, Vanna did intentionally leave a tiny flaw in her sundering attack, a crack that Emmett Selk can wiggle through. Sort of like, yes, it was a powerful attack, but intentionally chose to do this in this fashion. So we said this in the actual game as well, which is when Hydaelyn did the attack. It was a really strong one. It was delivered at the limit of her power, so she couldn't really fine-tune it. So as intentional as this was when she did that big massive light attack that sundered the world, she couldn't guarantee that Emmett Selk would live, and she was kind of making a gamble. In fact, what happened was, at the time that Hydaelyn performed the sundering, Emmett Selk was with La Habrea and Elidibus. In brackets here, the time was already out of being Zodiac Core, so he's a little bit different from his original, but nevertheless he was there. So they ended up joining forces and escaped to the rift without being sundered. You may recall, if you read Tales of the Shadows, that Elpis, when he came out of Zodiac, he ended up losing some of his memories as well as some of the parts of himself. And that's sort of the point in 5.3 when he, quote, dies. You did sort of know that he lost a lot in the process as well, just like Emmett Selk. So yeah, basically they worked together at that time and escaped being sundered. This proceeded to cause a joke from the comments, apparently, saying that Elpis, Emmett Selk, and La Habrea ended up escaping by not joining the shared damage marker, referring to a sundering attack, and ended up unscathed. That's quite good, actually. I love it when people think of little ways, game mechanic ways of avoiding lore-specific things. Next question. Are there sundered Ascians other than Fandaniel or black-masked Ascians of lower rank running around? I'd also like to know which Ascians those two red masks that Gaius carries around belong to. The answer here is, Ryoshipi says, wow, that's really meticulous of you. You're all paying really close attention to this game. That was a really good question. He says, yes, I do think there are still some of the sundered, black masks wearing Ascians running around. But those sundered Ascians, however many of them there are, we can't really say whether they are in the source or one of its reflections. As for the masks that Gaius carries around, they belong to Altima and Dudephalon. However, just because he has the mask doesn't necessarily mean that he vanquished them, so you have to come out with your own theories as to what's going on there. We have a lot in the story so far about what it takes to truly defeat an Ascian, so maybe try to think back on those things when you're making your own theories. Interesting. Does that mean potentially we might see some Altima and Dudephalon content in the future? I mean, maybe the Ascian story isn't over just because the Heidelin and Zodiac arc is over. Ooh, interesting. Chills. So the next question. In Yoshida-san's mind, how much time has passed during the story spanning from 1.0 to Endwalker? I want to know how many years older the Warrior of Light is now. Yoshipi says, to be honest, this question is hard to answer, and I don't have a particular figure in mind. When we're making the trailers and we come up with a storyboard and things like that, we actually think of things like the Warrior of Light has done these different adventures. How would they look now? And imagine there's a time frame of 2 to 2.5 years each time, just like in reality, what you have all done. But the trailers are not really reflecting the length of the story itself, so I would appreciate that you can think of them as a separate thing. As far as the story is concerned, I don't have an exact figure in mind or an exact imagining of how long it's been since 1.0. If I go down that rabbit hole, I'd never stop thinking of how old they are. Like, I don't know if I want to talk about it. It's better not to think about it, so just, feel or vibe. Maybe hear, feel, think, perhaps. End quote. So, yeah, basically it looks like they kind of don't want to, go down that route, because then obviously there's lots of loopholes that could come out of it and things they might have forgotten. You have to remember that this game is absolutely packed with story. I'm sure there's some piece of dialogue that would contradict any sort of thing that any of them would ever say. So I can understand why that would be difficult to ask. Next question. As I understand here, Emmett Selk and Hyphlodeus return to the ethereal sea so they can now be reborn. If their souls are reincarnated, will they be able to use creation magics like the Ascians? The answer is, well, their souls have been cleansed whilst being in the ethereal sea, so even if we say they're reincarnated, that's just their souls being reborn into new bodies in a source, just like everyone else. As for what will happen if they were reincarnated in the fashion we've never had an example of anyone who was unsundered being reincarnated like this, so we can't really say it for sure. I think they'd just be a normal person, but maybe a bit cooler, maybe a bit better, but there's really no way to say. In his opinion, Yoshipi says, this is just my imagination running here, but they really, at the end, accomplished everything they have set out to do, so their souls will be completely purified, and I don't know if they even really want to come back. I mean, they have nothing remaining. They have no lingering memories to address. End quote. Next question. Please tell us whether the star will be renamed Aetheris moving forward, or if we're still referring to it as Hydaelyn. Also, does everyone know the name Aetheris, or just the Warriors of Light and their allies? Yoshi says, I think people who are close to the Warrior of Light or otherwise very familiar with what actually happened in the final days will start calling it Aetheris. On the other hand, most of the people on the star, or most of your average Eorzeans, will probably keep on calling Hydaelyn because they know nothing of that stuff. However, there are people in the East, for instance, or the New World, who never called it Hydaelyn to begin with because they have different cultures. So, if we visit those areas, we might find another name entirely. I think the people who are struggling in this aspect the most would be the PR team. Like now, if we make catch copy that says something like, a grand adventure in Hydaelyn, then the Warriors of Light will be like, didn't you know it's actually called Aetheris and not Hydaelyn? And Fox Clan has a piece of information here. It says the PR team had already had the problem of calling it either Hydaelyn or Eorzea. So yeah, there we go. So yeah, it's basically, it's kind of locked behind that storyline, isn't it? So it'll be interesting to see what they do going forward. But yeah, the mention of a new world there is very, very interesting. I think you'll agree. Will Xenos come back to life again? Yeah, we knew we were going to get this question. The answer is, so as we saw Xenos' body right now, it remains in the dimension that is separate from our universe and all of its laws. I mean, we depicted his ultimate fate at length in the cutscene, so I think the answer is to watch that and see how you'd feel. I mean, we did show him stop breathing and his heart stop beating, right? End quote. I'm still not convinced, but I mean, personally, I hope that his story has concluded because it just seems to drag on, personally, but that's my own opinion. Let me know what you think anyway, but I suppose it's speculation at this point. So, yeah, next question. If you look at the source and its reflection today, they are inhabited by various races such as Makote, Aura, Lalafell, and so on. However, all of the ancients seem to be human-like races, so is there a law regarding how mankind came to have such a varied amount of races? So the answer to this is, when the world was sundered, all living beings became incomplete. But that said, incompleteness allowed them to develop strengths and weaknesses, and that, over time, compounded into racial traits. That sort of thing, like strengths and weaknesses over time, with elements of a little bit more or a little bit less, increases or be stronger in certain tribes and in turn developed into distinctive features. I don't know about the official law for this, but people are asking things like, okay, why are Makote ears so big? And I was like, I don't know, maybe they couldn't hear that well and tried super hard to hear, and maybe that was what led them to develop those big ears. So why are the Lalafell so tiny? Like, I don't know, maybe they're under a lot of pressure, or maybe they were really intense. End quote. It's a good question, isn't it? I mean, these are questions sort of posed towards like as if there's a real thing, but you've got to remember a lot of these things will be impacted by, you know, the MMORPG aspect of things, like the actual gameplay. So, yeah, I mean, it's a fantasy game. Otherwise, we would just all be playing as humans, which would be very bizarre. Next question. The ruins beneath the bounty, treasure islands, and fable of the golden cities mentioned by Emmett Selk haunt me with daydreams. Can we expect to be able to loot them someday? The answer is someday. He laughs. Yes, I mean, as you know, we had a lot of different place names cropped out in 14 in the past, and we have been able to go to a lot of places when the gates of Ishgard were opened. We went to Alamigo, we went to the Far East, we went to Old Sharlayan and even Fafnir. We try really hard to ensure that you can visit the places we mentioned so far, and he wants to keep doing that. Interesting. Really, really interesting. So maybe we will see the new world in the next expansion. That's my bet at the moment. I could be completely wrong. We'll see. Next question. In Elpis, Emmett Selk adjusted our Warrior of Light to be a closer representation to an ancient's height. Given how tall Meteon was compared to us, then versus the one in the present day, I feel like she shrunk. Did something happen to her in the intervening time, or is there another reason to this? The answer here is, just before that, I want to address that everyone seems really excited by my response to the previous question, and they are saying things like, oh wow, I will only be able to sleep at night because of this. All right, back to the size issues, I want you to remember that Ultima Thule is a space where emotions are the only reality. So what you see in Ultima Thule is in accordance with a warrior of light's internal experience and not some kind of physical reality that's out there. As the warrior of light, you're traveling to Ultima Thule to find Meteon, so the space reflects that, and it reflects your internal perception, and the warrior of light has the memories of Meteon from Elpis in a certain proportion relative to themselves. So the warrior of light was thinking, well, she's about this tall, and that's why she appears the way she does in Ultima Thule. So the same kind of logic goes to Emmett Selk and Hyflodeus when we call upon them. Ultima Thule is a place controlled by dynamis and emotions, so that it is your internal conception of those people that determines how they appear. This might make you judge the warrior of light a little bit, but yeah, that's how they remember it, end quote. Oh, interesting. So basically they're going with the idea that it was just your idle memory, once again, sort of flashback memories. This is kind of how it works with the extreme modes, right, of various fights in the game, with the Wandering Minstrel, etc. I guess it's the same kind of thing. Very interesting. Next question. I wanted to harvest some Favnerian onions whilst I was in Favnir. Where are they keeping them? Yoshi says, for this question, I've asked the lore team just for this. So the Favnerian onions have this unique element that affects these chocobo seeds. So they must be a really unique vegetable that can only be cultivated on a very small area of Favnir. Such things are dictated by the whims of the gods we call the non-combat content designers. In other words, it's their fault on how this came to be. In Japanese here it says, the lore team ended up shirking and transferred the hate to the non-combat content designers here. End quote. Basically, they're all shrugging in a corner going, did you do this? No. Did you think about this? No. It's your fault. No, it's your fault. That's quite funny, actually. I do like the sense of humor in this company. It's brilliant, isn't it? Oh dear. Next question. Were Zodiac and Hydaelyn completely destroyed? Or are there still sundered parts of them on other reflections? The answer is, to be really frank on this one and to give you a very straight answer here, Hydaelyn was completely destroyed. Similarly, Fandaniel crushed Zodiac's heart, which is his core, and that completely destroyed Zodiac. There were, of course, parts of Zodiac in other reflections where he was sealed and split across all of them. But at the same time, if his main body was destroyed, they all would have also faded into oblivion. End quote. So there we go. That answers your question. The Hydaelyn and Zodiac arc is definitely over because they are both dead and gone. Although, off the record here, I would definitely say, well, what's stopping them from being resummoned? But there we go. Nothing is really ever truly gone in this sort of universe, is it? But we'll have to wait and see. But that's what they're saying. They just want to get away from that storyline, I think, as fast as possible now. So the next question. I don't really understand why the Warrior of Light is messing around in Elpis and didn't create any alternate timelines with this. What happened? Answer. Well, I think the most important thing is that you can come up with your own theories for this. In my personal interpretation, says Yoshi P, however, is that the timelines were always the same. Another interpretation you can have is that maybe Vanna worked really, really hard behind the scenes to ensure the timeline didn't go awry. Therefore, the Warrior of Light was always acting in accordance with this plan of Vanna. So the timeline that we are aware of didn't change when we went back to the Affected. I personally think that when we went to Mare Lamentorum and we first met Argos, and Argos really took us in when we were able to ride it, that's basically the proof at this point that the timeline is going accordingly. We are adding all of those stuffs to New Game Plus in 6.1, so if you're interested in this, I suggest you replay it and think about the questions when you're replaying that as well. Interesting. Very, very interesting. So it was just meant to be, sort of thing. Next question. In the trailers, only the Warrior of Light seems to age, where the other characters seem to look the same. Will we ever get to see a grown-up Alphano and Alice? Yoshi says, well, this certainly makes this hard to answer. On one hand, as a director and a developer myself, it sounds fun to me to think about depicting years later a taller Alphano and Alice, who are cooler and maybe cute in a different way. On the other hand, I also feel like if we did that, we'd get a lot of comments being, no, my god, their previous ones were better and I liked them before. And I do. And if I do it once, we definitely can't go back. So it's kind of hard to pull the trigger on that one. Sometimes you get to see these kind of aged up characters in manga like One Piece, where Oda Sensei in his corner answering readers' questions asking, oh, I want to know what Zoro would look like at such age, and he'll draw that for them. So it's kind of a sort of what if scenario. Then we might be able to give you something in that vein. I'm getting a lot of comments here saying, it's really fine, like no matter how many years passed, it's fine if you just leave them as is. Apparently, Yoshi says, seems like everyone is yelling, do it in English over and over. We really have to be careful about the heights here, I'm afraid, quote, end. So basically, it's partly up to your interpretation, but if they do ever cover this ever, it'll be like a what if sort of thing, not necessarily a canonical example of what they would look like grown up. Maybe like a Tales from the series or something with some like quick sketched art or something. That'd be quite interesting, I personally think, but it is dangerous territory like Yoshi P is alluding to here. Right, next question. Vanna says, it says, Vanna said that not even her soul would remain, but what does that mean? I'm very fond of her character and would like to see her again. Interesting. The answer is that the souls are also made of ether, and she gave so much of her ether that includes all of her soul as well. By contrast, Zodiac was summoned using sacrifices of a lot of people, but he was able to only use their ether aside from their souls because Zodiac was really strong and summoned by the convocation of a 14 and so on. Heidelin had a much weaker summoning, and because of that she didn't have the option to leave her soul untouched, and that includes Vanna. She ended up using all of her ether. In 5.2 there was some discussion of Vanna's group that assisted her in doing this, and also how much of the ancient people were sacrificed to create Zodiac. So if you look back at that time, it might be of interest to you now. At the very end, Heidelin still had her own soul, which is Vanna's. That was the very power that she used to fight the Warrior of Light. When she tells you before the final bout in that trial, she had saved enough ether specifically to fight you, and that specifically points to Vanna's soul, end quote. So basically Vanna saved some to test you at the end to make sure that you're ready, and basically that was her last thing. That's when she fades and basically gets destroyed. That's you deal the final blow, basically. Interesting, isn't it? Next question. Now that Heidelin is gone, will the Warrior of Light no longer have the Blessing of Light? The answer is, I really don't think the Blessing of Light will disappear, and I wouldn't want it to, says Yoshi P. Perhaps she re-granted the blessing at the very end, but either way, I want to think that it will always protect the Warrior of Light, just like she said, my love will be with you forever, my dearest children. Those words, I think, will be the blessing that will carry forward, end quote. Very cool. I like that little quote there on the end. Yoshi P knows his stuff, definitely. And yeah, that's quite heartwarming, isn't it? All right, on to the next question. In the cutscene after the 87 dungeon, we see a red sigil appear for Xelk's face. Does that mean such sigils are an Asian thing, but rather identify one as belonging to the Convocation of 14? Please explain the lore. Yoshi P says, so it's not really just there for identification purposes, and if you think about it, every person who takes a seat in the Convocation of 14 has really intense magic power, so basically it appears whenever they use grand magic, almost as if it's a limiter that constrains their magic. However, each sigil does indicate the seats of a convocation, so even if someone who's not on the convocation went, oh yeah, magic time, whoa, it's not going to show up on their face. You can't just simply name yourself the 15th seat and then blast your magic hoping it will appear. I think it's also connected to the Convocation's responsibility, as those are the people that are acknowledged by the society as having these grand powers and taking up those seats. So, you don't want people just randomly wandering around blasting magic without knowing who it is or what purpose, so it indicates that they've been chosen for this role and keeps them in line. For that reason, I also think that when one leaves the seat, like for example when Vanna gave up her seat, she would also give up the sigil, so it would no longer appear on her. Yoshi P is then smirking at this. So people talking about the seat of Yoshida, but that just kind of makes me sad, because I think there's no one who could take up the seat if I give it up. Also, I don't have a cool symbol on my face, end quote. So there we go. So the way they get around revealing what Vanna's sigil would be is basically explained here. And it's quite clever, isn't it? So I'm guessing that this, again, is up to player interpretation to imagine what Vanna's actual symbol would be, her sigil. Very, very clever, actually. Very clever. I like that. Good job, Yoshi P and the team. You thought about everything that people would ask. Next question. In concluding the story, were there any threads you found difficult to wrap up or pieces of lore that you secretly changed or disregarded? Yoshi P says, this is another question that I had to ask Oda-san to provide an answer for here. And he says, the initial setting and background lore are only plans that we draw from, so it's not unusual for details to change or disappear as we write the story further. That's not only true for Endwalker, but you'd probably remember if you played 1.0, there were a lot of changes between 1.0 and A Realm Reborn, and sometimes we couldn't really retcon it properly, like for instance, in the 1.0, the Warrior of Light had a partner character. For those who are unaware, we did have this temporary partner, though, and we didn't know who exactly it would be or anything, so we just kind of ignored it and went on. When we were making this world, we go clueless onto what to do with it, just sometimes ignore things that are inconvenient. So yeah, there are some things where you'll just ignore it moving forward, but in most cases, we do try to wrap things up, and maybe, if there are still remaining, we can plan to wrap it up in the future. Yoshi P specifically picks the Heart of Sabik as one of these examples, end quote. Well, I'm glad that he brought that up as an example, because the Heart of Sabik mentioned in Praetorium, you have to wonder what exactly Sabik was, or what the heart relates to. But yeah, so maybe that's something we will explore in the future, hopefully, because that's a biggie. It's mentioned by name in dialogue, in voice acting. Anyway, so next question. Will we have a chance to learn the identities of the full convocation of 14 members? Yoshi P says, so yes, we've already decided on the true names and identities of every convocation member. Whether we will tell you or not, however, will depend on how the plot develops. Sorry to tease you, however, end quote. So I guess that's something that might crop up. I'm sure there'll be more Ascian lore soon. There's just too many loose ends not to tie up for that. Great opportunities for gameplay, I think. Next question. Vanna had good intentions and her plan worked out in the end, but as a result, the world was sundered and most of the ancients suffered. Was sundering the star really the only way to save it? This answer from Yoshi P says, this is a question that I consulted with Nashan, which is Natsuko Ishikawa, the scenario writer for Endwalker, to come up with the answer, so it will make sense when we explain it. At the very least, as Ishtola theorizes, Vanna believed that the ancients, being so dense in ether, could not control Dynamis, so she thought they could not have stopped the final days at its source. So, there were other ancients who thought summoning Zodiac would solve everything, but she saw that summoning Zodiac and using it to deflect Meteion's despair beam and thought, even if we were able to do this and keep going as we are, the rest of the ancients will probably be unable to change as a people. So, when she's looking at Hermes, or we will always be our own undoing. If you look at the dungeon the dead ends, at the very end there is a boss called Ra-La, and that's sort of our vision as to what probably would have happened to the ancients if we just let them continue as they were. So for that reason, she chose to sunder the star to dilute mankind's ether so that someday they might be able to use Dynamis and to fight back against despair and the final days at the source. As she herself says, this is not a simple matter of good and evil, and she is agonized over whether her decision is correct and took it all upon herself all this time. I think everyone has a lot of different feelings about Vanna, and we wanted to communicate to you that Hydaelyn is not evil. However, this is the decision she has made, and she decided to split the world into 14 parts so that humans can use Dynamis and kill Endsinger. And that decision really makes me think, yeah, Vanna is definitely an ancient, huh? At the end of 5.0, we find out that FFXIV has been making these decisions about all of humanity and its imperfection, but at the very end he did grant you one more chance to reevaluate his judgment. Hermes is also concerned with this to a degree that erases his memory so that he can once again reevaluate humanity and everything. He's really concerned with fairness and humanity's worth. Vanna herself never talks about herself in this lofty way that she is making a judgment on all of mankind, but when we see her holding the sword and says, "Henceforth he shall walk," and sundering the world, that really is an ancient moment that shows you how different the wholeness of these ancients were, because normally we normal humans wouldn't be able to make such a decision for all of mankind. So when I see that, I really think, yeah, Vanna was really one of them. I do get that FFXIV is a really popular character, but I sort of agree with Alphano when Emmett is talking about judging people and thinks, what right does he have to do that? And that might be applicable to Vanna too. Like, what right does she have to do that? With showing various things about the ancients and how different they were from us as people and how they were sort of the same. So I think if you go back and look at all the different parts, including the side quest, including the ancients in them, you might find them interesting, end quote. Oh, that is a great recommendation. I spent a lot of time personally in Elpis doing all of the side quests there. There are quite a few interesting tidbits of information, and there are quite some hilarious moments as well, especially the revelations of creatures that you actually ended up being the creator of, non-directly, but as an influence, especially in naming conventions and things. It's quite fun. Definitely go and do Elpis in its entirety. That's my recommendation. Next question. The Sorcerer's Moon was made to imprison Zodiac after the Sundering, but what about the First's Moon? Was the theories the only thing divided among parallel dimensions, or did the Sundering affect the surrounding and part of the outer space too? The answer to this is, first of all, I want to tell you that the Reflections Moon has their own significance. They do, but I can't talk about it. So after the Sundering, Zodiac was imprisoned in the moon that we know. Moons were created and appeared in all other reflections with pieces of Zodiac in them as well. We're going to show this properly later or in future patches, so I can't show you now, but yes, there is some meaning to it. End quote. Oh, interesting. So there basically is a moon in all of these different places, all these different reflections. So even the first then, I guess the moon up there in the first will be, part of Zodiac trapped in that as well. But presumably they would have probably gone as well, right? Dissipated into nothingness. Very, very interesting. Very interesting. So this is the other section of the Q&A. It says, during the development, so this is basically not necessarily law related. The first bit was just primarily law, but these are sort of like miscellaneous questions. So the first one of this is, during the development closes, what part of Endwalker were you a perfectionist about? Yoshi P says, as for the things that I've been really particular about this time, I would say that in every single cutscene I was concerned with the direction where the characters were looking, and also the time between dialogue and conversation, and also the motions, especially in the beginning of each character's speech. Personally, I think the direction of the gaze and how your gaze works is very important. Your eyes can convey a lot of emotion, and it's not just your whole chin moving, and that's your gaze, right? So in the stage directions and such, I was really concerned with, okay, are your eyes going to move first? Is the head going to turn? What's the most natural way to convey this expression? And so on. Also, usually we have 14 as the game that you can play at whatever pace you want, but this time we had a lot of scenes where it would go on autoplay through the text, and when a character talks in these scenes, I really wanted the other character to take a bit of time to process those words before responding, because that's important processing time for all you players as well. So I was quite annoyed at how particular I was about this. I also was particular about things not being misunderstood. As you know, obviously, when you have something foreshadowed or hinted at, that's fine to leave it up to people's interpretation. But there are certain interpretations we really didn't want to guide the player towards. So I was particular about how we were portraying this. Part of this was also because Natsuko Ishikawa was also busy writing the script until the very last minute for the expansion, so she couldn't perform her checks as closely as possible, and in retrospect couldn't stand in for her. I'm probably the closest person, so I ended up doing a lot and being really particular. Because Endwalker was essentially the first finale that we had in 14 with the end of the Heidelin and Zodiac arc, I really wanted to have Yoshitaka Amano-sensei arts being in it. I'm a big fan of his, and obviously he's associated with the arts in 14 and all of that, so I asked him to do the art, and when we were reproducing those designs in game, I was super particular about getting it right. Of course, ever since A Realm Reborn, I am the one who is giving Amano-sensei his orders for what we want him to draw. And this time I was like, let's have Amano-sensei draw the last boss, and I wanted him to draw Despair. This time his response was like, Despair? But he's really good at talking to me back and forth each time we want to envision here. And in this case, despair, and in a certain situation, if you feel despair, what comes to mind, and in this case we added in the extra sort of difficulty of making the bird imagery as well. After 15 minutes, however, he managed to ease us down by saying he had something in mind. I really want to show you the original design we got from him for the Endsinger at some point, so hopefully we can get the chance to show it. As for the other things like the quest instance battles that I was quite focused on as well, as the subquest timing for how they unlocked and such, we got some comments about it. Yeah, this time, obviously, because we have the final days going on, it's very important to measure the timing and unlock them at the appropriate time. Like this is happening before or during the apocalypse comes. You don't really want something during the apocalypse to go, can you feed my chocobo on you? And it wouldn't fit very well. Also, if you just have them all unlocked at the same time and suddenly your screen is full of exclamation marks, that's terrible. I hate that. So that's why this time I played through them so many times and thought, okay, when you get to this sequence of a quest, there's these 3 other quests that will unlock, and 3 is probably a decent number that people can get through than that sort of thing. So yeah, while it's good to have these quests will be unlocked after doing this quest, when you are progressing through the game, but at the same time, in order to create a good experience for those who wanted to go throughout all the quests, I had to do them a whole bunch of times, which was really hard. Also, sometimes I thought, couldn't we have less of these? Also, I was quite concerned with the showdown with Heidelin, as well as the dialogues for Trust. In this case, I actually got to write some dialogue for the first time in a while, so writing all the dialogue lines was really fun, end quote. I mean, it's very interesting to see inside Yoshipi's mind of what he prioritizes, and you can tell that those quests were thought about in Elpis quite a bit. Again, I would really strongly advise you go do Elpis. It is a really, really interesting zone, and it's interesting to see how some of that, how some of that lore has bigger meaning than perhaps you first think as well. Definitely worth looking at. But yeah, Yoshipi is a god amongst men by the looks of it. He really does work very hard, honestly. Next question. Healers are currently putting out too much healing compared to damage taken and have few damage dealing options and limited flexibility in battle. People are even clearing Pandemonium with tank only parties. So are there plans to make healers more vital to parties? End quote. The answer to this is I want to emphasize that we have done the same as we did in every previous expansion here. And at the start of the expansion, we hold back on the difficulty for the raid in terms of damage taken, damage dealt, and that sort of stuff. And we made it a bit easier so that many people can clear. You're probably comparing the raid as it is now to what you had in patch 5.4 with Eden's Promise, but you have to remember that in 6.0 we added new jobs, and we're still balancing things and giving people a chance to clear if they possibly can, and from there we'll raise the challenge level in part 2 and part 3 of Pandemonium. I think even at that point, if you're still unsatisfied thinking healing is too easy, definitely try the ultimate content and suffer. End quote. He actually emphasizes suffer there on ultimate content. Yeah, personally, I disagree with this completely. This comes across as somebody who hasn't played through expansions before. This is normal. The first tier is always easier than the later tiers. So yeah, what Yoshi P says is absolutely correct. Next question. Dark Knight's Living Dead and Blood Weapon are more difficult to use effectively compared to the other tank skills. Are there plans to adjust this? And the answer is not just Dark Knight, but a whole bunch of jobs will be adjusted in 6.1. We are looking closely at your feedback and will fulfill as many of your requests as we possibly can in 6.1. We are definitely adjusting Living Dead, so you can wait and see how that goes. We've also seen your feedback for Machinist and White Mage, but you're having trouble right at the moment, and we're working on that, so please wait just a little longer. We're also looking at Dragoon and their concern about their jump animation lock being too long, and we will try to shorten that up. So we're going to adjust things that affect the feel of your gameplay in addition to just the numbers. And of course, I have to say that even if I don't specifically mention your job today, we're still looking at your feedback and making adjustments for those too. So please don't descend on us in a cloud of black smoke because I'm scared, he says, end quote. So yeah, they're addressing job fixes and big job fixes in 6.1. So I guess we'll wait with bated breath, and we'll probably get more information on March the 4th, since that's the first part of a live letter to do with 6.1 specifically. Next question. Given that we now have Sage and Reaper, will you be increasing the number of Glamour plates? The answer to this is right. So there are various requests that we need to address related to the Glamour system, like the number of plates, the areas you can use them in, the size of your Glamour dresser, etc., etc. But we can really only address these slowly in a systematic way. We are really working on it, and in 6.1 we will be increasing the number of plates. The amount of plates people wanted to increase differs by person, and I can't tell you exactly how many we're adding, but I think it should be sufficient for the time being. We are definitely increasing how many pieces you can store in the dresser and how many places you can use these plates, so when we can fit them into our schedule, starting in 6.1, we'll be adding more features, end quote. So there we go, that was one of the biggest takes from this. So first of all, we're getting Glamour plate increases, and then we'll have an increase to the size of the dresser and places, of course, where we can use Glamour plates and change things like that will be changing too. So whether that means we'll ever see a Glamour dresser in a house, I don't know. But as it stands, this seems to be the thought process and the way that they're proceeding down this. And I think that's personally quite a good way of doing it. At least then we have got answers that one day we will have more freedom with that. Very good. Next question. Will we be able to obtain gear such as an Imperial officer's armor and uniforms, Garlean gunblades, Imperial lab coats, and Charlian Forum members' uniforms in the future? Yoshi P says, first of all, the Charlian Forum members' uniform is something we've already decided upon. Up until 6.0, we had mostly shunned the Garleans as just ruthless enemies, and we haven't really given them the opportunity to show the normal citizens as well as the perspective of their stories. But now that we've done that, we could start seeing some gear that is Garlean themed, end quote. I'm very hyped. Very, very hyped. Even if it's cash shop, I'll buy it. I would love to look like Nero's outfit, for example. Absolutely amazing with a big hammer or something. Very cool. Next question. Do you plan to implement the song that played on the radio in Glamour as an orchestrion role? Yoshi P says it's awfully popular, I see. Yes, we've decided to implement the version you hear on the radio, the one with distortion on it, as an orchestrion in 6.1. We actually have a version with a distortion and without distortion, but Soken felt that as a sound director, he wanted to give people something as close to the in-game experience that you hear for the first time as possible for the orchestrion, so we decided to go with a distorted version first. Very interesting. I wonder if that means we'll get the other version at some point. That would be interesting to hear, actually. Next question. Will we be able to take up residence in Charlian or the moon that the Laporites worked so hard to make someday? Even just apartments will be fine. Yoshi P basically just looks defeated at this point and says, please, please, just try living in Ishgard first. We can't keep up. I mean, yes, for 6.1 we've come up with a lottery system for housing. We've also announced the increase for the overall amount of housing. So it's not like we won't do it, nor that we don't want to, but maybe slow down a little bit. We really can't catch up. If we could, that would be nice, he says, end quote. So there we go. That's not a no, but not quite yet. So last few questions here. Will you add minions for Emmett, Selk, Hades, and Xenos? Yoshi B says, well, I'm the one who decides who we put in as minions, and I always hold back on putting out minions of characters whose roles are not done in the story, but now that we're done with Endwalker, we can consider doing this. Though, I think that's what Xenos would have wanted. Is it okay for Xenos to be a minion? He's going to follow you everywhere. End quote. Personally, at least they are answering the fact that Xenos could be a minion because his story's over. I mean, it answers the question that a lot of people have had, but that's how they decide upon minions, basically. If a storyline is over with that character, for the most part, or at least their chapter, doesn't necessarily mean that they're dead, though, right? It just means that their chapter of storyline's over is when you get minions. Very interesting to know that going forth, I think. Next question. Do you have any updates regarding female Hrothgar? Yoshibi says, we're just done with Endwalker, finally. And we're working on graphic updates. But no, we will not have forgotten about female Hrothgar. So right now, we had the art team draw a variety of styles for a possible female Hrothgar design. We've picked 2 of them, and we're currently thinking about how those would look and what adjustments we would have to involve in putting those into character creation. So obviously it's going to be some time before we can actually implement them as a race, but as we are working and we are making progress right now. People are saying, are you really going to do it? And if I say I'm going to do something, I will do it. I mean, I've said I'll do it. There are also people saying probably not many people will play as female Hrothgar, but I think we've come this far, and it's not really a matter of will they be super popular, and it's not like everyone needs to use all races equally. So, people decide what characters should be played on a lot of different reasons, or focus on the inside or outside. And some people may play a lot of certain types of characters, or not be allowed to play that type of character, and that gives the world a lot of flavor and variety. Especially because we're aiming to be a game where you can play solo or with friends. So to be honest, we're not overly focused on players needing to play equally as long as everyone is having a good time. Of course, because I've said that, now everyone is coming up with their ideas for a new race that we could add. Please remember that when I presented female Viera and male Hrothgar during the announcement of Shadowbringers, I've said that these races will be the last ones we'll be doing. Remember that, guys? Well, if your memory was vague up to that point, remember it now, that female Hrothgar is the last one I'll want to do. End quote. And indeed, end of the Q&A section for that live letter. What an incredible assortment of questions. Some of the questions were obviously more meaningful to different people than others, but there's definitely an eclectic mix and variety here. So I think they've done a really good job of picking questions that ask and itch various different people's attention. So we've got class stuff, we've got lore-based stuff, lots of interesting stuff. I think the thing I will take from this is the stuff to do with Hydaelyn and Zodiac being completely dead, and stuff to do with Emmett and things like that. Those bits were really interesting to me personally, and it's especially interesting to know that only at the end of someone's storyline, like their individual storyline, will they get a minion. So I guess we'll be waiting a lot longer for minions of certain characters in the game that I would like. Anyway, let me know if you like this. Thank you so much to Illuminaminore/11mile on the subreddit Discord for Final Fantasy XIV. You can, of course, find a link to that if you want to go and join it and give some love to the lovely people over there on Reddit. But yeah, thank you very much for watching this, and thank you to Yoshi B for spending time with us on a lovely live letter. And we have a lot to think about going forward. March the 4th is the next live letter, and I will be going over that exactly the same as I have in the previous video, which you all seem to like, the summary video. And of course, if there's anything in part 2 that's Q&A related or whatever it might be, I will also do subsequent videos covering that as well. But for more like this on a weekly schedule, sometimes more than not, but I don't really like making videos if there's nothing to talk about, so bear that in mind. But yeah, much love, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much for spending time with me if you've made it to the end of this, and I'll see you all next time. Bye bye.